At Digital Eclipse, we believe that classic games need to be treated with the same respect as other classic works of art, and that is why we're rolling out the Gold Master series. It is a series of interactive documentaries all about the making of legendary games. The first entry in the Gold Master series is called The Making of Karateka. It is all about Karateka, which is a game that Jordan Mechner released in 1984 for the Apple II computer. Jordan is best known as the creator of Prince of Persia, but Karateka was actually his debut title.
I don't think the game industry was ready for Karateka when it came out in 1984. Karateka to me felt like just a complete shift in how we engaged and experienced gaming. Until Karateka, everything was pretty much a spaceship shooting at targets. And Karateka was the first game where it felt like I was in a story or watching a movie, but it wasn't just trying to chase movies. It made me feel like the hero in a movie. Everything that was transpiring in the game feel dramatic and unlike anything I had experienced before.
Jordan Mechner was a teenager at Yale University when he created Karateka, and it came not only from his love of video games but his love of films. He was in the Yale Film Society, big film nerd, and Karateka made extensive use of film and cinematic techniques, cutting back and forth between the hero and the enemy, cutscenes in which the player was not even shown on screen. The other characters were shown kind of acting out their parts in these cutscenes. A film-like score. It was actually a leitmotif style approach where every character or every emotion had a small little repeated melody.
An awful lot of the time when you hear video game history stories, you hear the story of the crash of the early 80s and then Nintendo saving the industry and coming back with a new console. And that's absolutely true, but there are a lot of other stories that happened in between that time and around that time that haven't gotten a chance to be told. The Making of Karateka is one of those stories. It's a critical tale of video game innovation on a home computer platform at a time when console gaming basically didn't exist.
The Apple II was the first time, I think, that people who were fans of games, it was a tool that people could use to make games. I think Jordan's story is very similar to so many other people's story where they would go to the arcade, they're huge fans of games, and there were so many people who were like, how do I do this myself? How can I make something like this?
Jordan was a total programming whiz kid. Like, he was really, really great at the Apple II, and he knew that he could make a lot of money if he broke into the video game industry. That's what he wanted to do. He started out by kind of looking around at what he felt was popular and essentially trying to copy that or make his own version of that. So he started out by creating DEATHBOUNCE, which was like an asteroids style spaceship shooter in which instead of breaking up asteroids, you were sort of confined in this little box, and the enemies were bouncing balls that actually rebounded off of the walls. We're bringing it back. We're actually releasing DEATHBOUNCE for the first time. Not only are we releasing it, but we're actually putting all 4 of Jordan's different prototypes for DEATHBOUNCE in the Making of Karateka.
You get to go through every prototype that existed for DEATHBOUNCE and see where it worked, where it didn't work, why it didn't work, and then ultimately where it landed. And every prototype that you play, you can see, but you can really feel the iteration. Video gaming is an iterative process. This is one of the few times that I've been able to see that you can play that history for yourself and really get insight into the creation, along with notes and interviews with the creator at the time and today. It's really something special.
Before this project even kicked off, I had read through The Making of Karateka, and it's just his diary. It's his just raw diary published. We're fortunate that Jordan kept a journal when he was younger during this whole process, when he made Karateka, when he made DEATHBOUNCE, the game that didn't ship, when he made even later games like Prince of Persia. He has these journals.
The great thing about teenage Jordan Mechner is that he meticulously documented his process. He had a daily journal in which he wrote about everything that he did on the game that day. He did all of his designs on paper and he saved every piece of paper. So when you jump into the Making of Karateka, the first thing you're going to see are the interactive timelines on which the full story of Karateka is presented. So as you go through, you're going to find entries from Jordan's journals that he wrote when he was 18 years old. You're going to find, high quality restored scans of Jordan's design documents, not only for Karateka, but for many other kind of projects that he was working on leading up to that. As you start to look at all of these things, you can see how Karateka came together. Jordan Mechner is just well known as this legendary game designer, who moved on from Karateka to things like Prince of Persia and The Last Express. And what's not really told very much about his origin story is the impact of his father, Francis Mechner.
There's a beautiful father-son story here that I don't think a lot of people are going to expect until they dive in.
Jordan's father, Francis Mechner, who was in no way a video game designer or a video game player, but he was a brilliant behavioral psychologist, and he was a classical pianist, and he was a devoted dad who wanted to support his son any way he could. Francis Mechner ends up composing the soundtrack to Karateka, which really was a huge part of why that story was so impactful, because the Apple II really didn't have very good sound capabilities, but Francis and Jordan working together were really able to extract as much emotion as they could out of the Apple II's little speaker.
And when Jordan said, "Dad, I need to film you in the backyard. I need to film you running through the forest," he did it.
So when you see the little, Karateka hero running around, that's Jordan's father's motion capture.
As much as Jordan is part of this narrative, his father is an even bigger part of this narrative. You always hear about the auteur, the person who did these things, whatever, but you never really hear about the support system around that auteur and how that auteur's origin story kind of came to be.
Video game history is littered with people who have not gotten enough credit, and the Gold Master series will hopefully be a tool that we can use to bring their stories to light.
There's over an hour of video features in the Making of Karateka, which not only take us through the actual sort of nuts and bolts of Jordan putting the game together, but we also talked to people like Tom Hall, co-founder of id Software.
Or Raf Koster, who's one of the pioneers of MMOs, and you bring these people in because they can give you the context and the import of what Karateka is better than we ever could.
You can play Jordan's original prototype. You can play the Apple II version that was released. You can play the Atari 800 and the Commodore 64 versions. You can even hear from Veda Cook, who ported both of those versions, about how difficult it was to port them. And you can even play from Digital Eclipse's president, Mika. It's called Karateka Remastered. It is Karateka for modern consoles with a lot of improvements and updates and cut content, while really trying to maintain the core, of what made Karateka, so good in the first place. And Mike has even done commentary throughout the whole thing, talking about not only his process in making Karateka Remastered, but his insight into how Jordan made the original Karateka.
While I may have been satisfying my urge to port Karateka because it's one of my favorite games, I more so wanted to satisfy the urge of discovering why this was a hard thing for people to do in the late 80s and early 90s.
The Gold Master series is hopefully going to be a platform where you will get more insight into classic games than you've ever been given before.